Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 95, The Wilson Brothers. James Sim Wilson was an old Eureka Stockade man who'd been one of the first to discover gold at Buninyong near Ballarat in Victoria. With his wife Jane Sarah Brown, he became landlord of Hopwood's Bridge Hotel at Echuca. And his sons became prominent citizens of that town. Before that, they owned a pub in Geelong. And I found an article on the 9th of November 1875 that outlines a contesting of a will that was very interesting, considering that their son Bervin was mentioned and only really just an adult at the time. On the 9th of November 1875, there was an article outlining a law report in the Supreme Court in the sittings in equity. There was a rule nisi calling on James Wilson as the next of kin of Bervin Robert Wilson to show cause why a probate of a will, Robert Kelsall, deceased, should not be granted to William Shepherd. The rule was opposed on the grounds that a later will was used by Kelsall in favour of Wilson. His Honour in giving judgment said, "In the case of the late Mr. Roger Kelsall, Mr. Shepherd advertised his intention of moving for probate of a will in his favour, dated August 1873. Mr. James Wilson caused a caveat to be entered before Shepherd's motion was made, relying on a subsequent will in favour of his wife Jane and son Bervin Robert on June the 18th, 1873. Kelsall was at one time on good terms with Shepherd, and the evidence as to the first will is clear. He quarrelled with Shepherd and was criminally prosecuted by him, so that a wish to revoke that will was very natural. He was separated from his wife. He had been for some months living at Wilson's Hotel in Geelong and had been kindly treated, and in sickness, terminating in death on June the 20th, had slept in the room with the son, Bervin Robert, a lad aged 19, who liked him, and there was evidence of the son that he had expressed an intention of having a will made somewhat in his favour and made inquiries about having it regularly done, and that the son had written a few words of an introduction of a will. There was every probability of his making a will in favour of the Wilsons if he had anything to leave. It is still doubtful if he had. According to the evidence presented by the Wilsons and Mr. Williamson, Kelsall was ill in bed, well acquainted with Williamson, who left Geelong on a shooting excursion about June the 10th. During Williamson's absence, Kelsall got much worse and frequently expressed a wish to see Williamson. He was not regarded in imminent danger, and his death, when it occurred, was hardly expected so soon. Williamson on the 18th returned to Geelong, cold and wet, and before going home stopped at Wilson's Hotel to get some refreshments and inquire about Kelsall. Mrs. Wilson urged him to go up to his bedroom, and Williamson did reluctantly, being in a hurry to get home. Kelsall told him he wanted him to make a bit of a will for him, at which Williamson laughed and said nonsense, as he said he had nothing to leave. Kelsall got angry and insisted that he should without delay. Williamson wrote a will, leaving all the property to Mrs. Jane Wilson and her son Bervin, which was duly executed by Kelsall, sitting up in bed and witnessed by Mrs. Wilson and Williamson. Williamson carried off the will in his pocket, hung it up with the rest of his wet clothes, got very ill himself the next day, and was confined for more than a fortnight. Williamson and Mrs. Wilson are the witnesses to the material facts, but are corroborated as to Williamson's arrival at the time, being upstairs. Mrs. Wilson states that she informed her husband that night of the fact of making the will. It was not mentioned to the son, but about the 8th of July he was informed that Kelsall's property might be of some value and communicated that to his father and mother. Shepherd's advertisement appeared on the 9th of July, and on the same day Mrs. Wilson went to Williamson about the will and got it, and showed it to her son and husband. All their stories seems natural and probable. I've had conflicting evidence as to the alleged will being a forgery, and the opportunity of comparison of handwriting between it and Shepherd's will, and a variety of documents produced by him, and gone through the various matters of similarity and dissimilarity noticed by the witnesses, and my opinion would be decidedly in favour of the genuineness of the document. There is something improbable as to the negligent manner in which this will was alleged to have been treated, and I could readily understand the Wilsons keeping silence on the subject of wills. But there is very distinct evidence of their having spoken in a way inconsistent with its existence. Mrs. Wilson, on cross-examination, said, "I knew Golding. I never told him I had no will, and I was sorry for it, nor to Thomas Price, nor did I hear my husband say, and nor did I say before Golding, never mind, there may be a will yet," in the presence of Maley. James Wilson, on his cross-examination, said, "I know Maley. I never told him it would pay £1,000 to have a will, but there was no will, and I could have had one. Never did I say to Golding we had no will, nor did my wife say so, nor that she was sorry for it, nor never mind there will be a will yet. I did not tell Shepherd I had no will. Someone may have spoken of a will Kelsall directed my son to write. Mr. Maley, I was in the hotel a few days after Kelsall's death. There was a conversation. I, James Wilson and William Golding were present, Mrs. Wilson in and out. Wilson said, 'I hear Shepherd has got a will of Roger's. I have been a great fool. I have lost £1,000 by not getting Roger to make a will before he died, but I did not expect he would die so soon. It would have paid me well to have sent over for you,' that is Maley, 'and get you to make a will for Roger.' A day or two afterwards I heard Mrs. Wilson say, 'It is a great pity we did not get a will made by Roger before he died.' The first conversation was 3 or 4 days after the funeral, the second 2 days later. Mr. Golding's evidence: I went with Maley a few days after Kelsall's death to Wilson's hotel. Wilson said he could have had a will 50 times, but he thought the man had nothing to leave, as the property all went to an heir in England. Mrs. Wilson was backwards and forwards and sometimes joined the conversation. She said if Shepherd had a will, she would sooner any person had it than he. Another witness, Mr. Henry Smith, gave evidence. I worked next door to Wilson. The morning after Kelsall's death, Wilson stopped and asked if I had heard of it, then of Shepherd having a will of his. He said he could have had one for the benefit of his son. Williamson was asked on cross-examination whether he had said at the hotel of Mrs. Hubbard, sister of Mrs. Wilson, in the presence of Levin, anything about cooking Shepherd's will. Mr. Levin's evidence is, I saw Williamson at the Hubbards after Kelsall's death and heard through a petition a conversation between him and Mrs. Hubbard. I heard her ask if he knew Shepherd had a will, and he said, I do not believe Kelsall had anything to will. She said, don't be too sure of that. He replied, if I knew there was anything to will, I should soon cook it. My opinion is very undecided, but the arguments against the validity of the will preponderate. Neither party asked for trial by jury, and the amount of the property is so small that I should be sorry to indict that expense for my satisfaction. The final proceeds of the will was £137. It is usual in cases of imputed fraud to give costs according to the result, but here I am so perfectly uncertain whether I am right that I will make the rule absolute without costs. So James Sim Wilson died in 1892, and it stated, the late Mr. J.S. Wilson. The memory of the late Mr. James Sim Wilson does not deserve to be cast into the waters of oblivion simply because the last sod has been thrown on his grave. His life carries us back to the early days when he was numbered amongst those who are today chased among the grand old pioneers who devoted a life's service in building up colonial history. He was one of those who partook of all the hardships and struggles of the early days, who spent his sinew and brain in that alluring service which in the days of yore persuaded all the feverish energies of a man into existence. The thirst for the bright yellow gold, and amid scenes which form the most startling epochs in the history of Victoria, he toiled and struggled amongst the maddening thousands who came out in the 50s. The late Mr. Wilson was born in the county of Peebles near Stirling Castle, Scotland in 1830, and at 10 years of age ventured out to the colonies. In after years, when the great gold fever spread, he was one of the notable miners of the period and was one of the first to discover gold in Buninyong, where he laboured with success for some time. He travelled to New Zealand and was foremost in the Great Rush there, but it was during the stirring times at Ballarat that the most marked events in the history of his life occurred. He made the acquaintance of the late Peter Laylaw at the Eureka Stockade and participated in all the excitement of the times. He was included in one of the, if not the very first, volunteer rifle corps of the colony and thus rendered service to his new country, just at a period as it was getting sore danger of running through a fiery vein of riot and disorder. His work was not, however, without recompense, as in the Golden City he amassed a fortune, but through the decline of the alluvial diggings and speculation he lost it all, selling out at a great sacrifice before the reefs were developed. His mining career was a remarkable one. Almost without exception he attended all the great early gold rushes of the colony, and many a stirring tale of scenes in Digger's life was he able to tell, and all were rendered interesting by his having experienced most of what he had to tell. After many years of ceaseless toil, he managed to amass considerable property at Geelong, and here he indulged in much speculation in the belief that it would have been the capital of the colony. However, he sold out when trade declined there and settled down at the Tarwin River Gippsland, where at the time of his demise he left some valuable property. It was only during the last few years that Echuca knew him as a resident, but it is questionable if many knew him sufficiently well to acquire any real knowledge of his personal attributes. He was a man of special integrity, having a high conception of principles. Pleasant in social intercourse but unassuming in his manner, he made friends who in turn found him to be ever staunch and true. His had certainly been a life of honest hard toil, and only latterly in the declining years of his life had he indulged in that well-earned rest of which he was so fully entitled. Now he has passed by on the other side, and his friends in this vale of tears mourn sincerely for a good father, a true friend, and an exemplary citizen. There are some today who have sorrowfully placed a mourning stone on his cairn, knowing full well that in paying tribute of respect they are acknowledging the value of one who in life deserves to be respected for what he was, a man in the true sense of the word. He has left 2 grown-up sons and a wife, the esteemed landlady of the Bridge Hotel, and 2 daughters to mourn him. The former are well known in connection with the steamer, the Lancashire Lass, trading on the Murray. So it states, published on the 30th of November 1882, that James Sim Wilson on the 25th of November at Hay died, and he was the beloved husband of Jane Sarah Wilson, aged 61. And there's another notice at this time that on the 28th of November at the Bridge Hotel, Doris Rosa, the infant daughter of Bevan Robert and Sarah Rosa Wilson, aged only 3 weeks. So on the 26th of November 1894, there was notice of probate for James Wilson. Notice is hereby given that after the expiration of 14 days from this publication, that the application will be made to the Supreme Court in the Colony of Victoria for probate of the estate of James Wilson, commonly known and called James Sim Wilson, late of Hanarina, Gippsland, in the Colony of Victoria, Grazier, deceased, and it may be granted to Bevan Robert Wilson of High Street, Echuca, in the Colony of Victoria, steamboat operator, son of the deceased. So Jane Wilson ran the Bridge Hotel in Echuca until May 1889, and then she transferred the licence to her son Clarence. And on the 16th of February 1895, it announces the death of Jane. On Sunday the 10th of January, Jane Sarah Wilson, the relict of the late James Sim Wilson, late of Manarina, Gippsland, and beloved mother of B.R., C.J. and E.J. Wilson of Echuca, aged 60 years. On the 5th of November 1878, notice of application for a publican's licence, licensing magistrates at Kerrang. Bevan Robert Wilson, Koondrook storekeeper, hereby give notice that I desire to obtain at the next licensing meeting certificate authorising the issue of a publican's licence for a house situated at Koondrook in the parish of Murrabet, Murray River, Shire of Swan Hill, containing 5 rooms exclusive for the use of family. So in 1882, the boat The Glimpse was launched as a hull, and it was completed in 1883. Bevan Wilson was both builder and owner of this vessel, living at Koondrook at the time. Although it was a small vessel, the river reports show that she was kept busy carrying produce like wheat, hides and skins, chaff and wool up the river. And there was an article in the Kerrang Times and Swan Hill Gazette outlining this new boat on the 20th of June 1882. The dull routine of Koondrook was somewhat varied on Wednesday last by the launch of Mr. Wilson's new boat. Quite a number of people from Koondrook and the surrounding district assembled to witness the launch and wish success to the boat and the enterprising proprietor. All being in readiness, the ropes were cut away and she glided down the well-greased ways. The proverbial bottle of wine was broken and the boat was christened the Glimpse. Mr. Wilson may congratulate himself on having one of the prettiest models on the river, a boat that reflects great credit on her builder. After the launch, Mr. Wilson invited all assembled to drink success to his new venture, an invitation that was willingly responded to. And there was a story on the Glimpse from the book The River Boats by T. Moody. Bevan built the Glimpse on the bank of the Murray, near the hotel he was running at Koondrook. He then gave up pub keeping and went on the river in partnership with his brother. Although both the Wilsons became skippers later on, neither of them had a ticket when they launched the Glimpse in 1883, so they took C.P. Johnson on as their skipper. One of their first voyages was up to Yarrawonga. On the way down on the 14th of September, 8 miles above Bumanumanu, the Glimpse struck hard on a snag and was hidden 2 feet below the surface, the ripples it created being hidden by those raised by high wind. The accident happened in midstream. Clary Wilson, who was mate, grabbed a blanket and rushed to try and stop the hole, but he couldn't find it. By then there was 2 feet of water in the stokehole, so her nose was run on a sandbank, where she went down, leaving her bows above water. Sheer legs were erected, and the next morning they hove the vessel up. The 2-foot hole was patched, the hull bailed out, and the Glimpse went down to Tocumwal to load wool. However, on the 25th of January 1886, so about 3.5 years after he built it, it stated in the Crane Times and Swan Hill Gazette, the steamer Glimpse, owned by Mr. B.R. Wilson, was destroyed by fire on Monday night. While the steamer was passing up the river a few days ago with a barge load of wheat, the paddle shaft broke, disabling the vessel and rendering it necessary to put her into the riverbank. The Rothby afterwards took the boat and barge in tow with the intention of taking them to Koondrook, but during the voyage the shaft of the former vessel also broke, the final catastrophe by which the Glimpse was totally lost, which occurred a few miles below Koondrook during the absence of the owner, who left for Sandhurst to arrange for necessary repairs. The mate, it seems, who was in charge, had occasion to go on shore, leaving the boat apparently quite safe, but on his return she was ablaze, and after burning to the water's edge sank. The officer succeeded in saving the cash box, but everything else was lost. Bevan Wilson resurrected the Glimpse, and it was rebuilt by him at Koondrook in 1886. It was raised from 20 feet of water, and it was slipped at Koondrook for rebuild on the 24th of June. So the second Glimpse was rebuilt using the first Glimpse's hull. It was lengthened, and then it was relaunched on the 25th of January 1887. The steamer was eventually owned by Arbuthnot and Sons, and for many years towed barges along the river to the mill. When its service ended, the engine was placed in the steamer of the Alexander Arbuthnot. So on the 6th of April 1888, it is mentioned in the shipping intelligence at the port of Echuca that the Glimpse has arrived with R. Wilson as the master from Koondrook with a cargo of salt from the Koonat Salt Company. On December the 16th, 1891, Bevan married Sarah Rose McPhail. They married at the Presbyterian Church in Echuca, and it mentions that Sarah Rose is the eldest daughter of Alexander McPhail, late of Launceston, Tasmania. They had 9 children in total, 6 surviving infancy, and Bevan became the publican of the Bridge, previously known as the Border Hotel, until 1901. He was also twice mayor of Echuca. He was a popular contender in the Skipper's Plate bicycle race. And in the Riverine Herald on the 16th of September 1895, an article titled The Bridge Hotel. Bevan Wilson, proprietor. In every city, town and borough there is some sort of historical interest. Some place round which old memories linger and make it a landmark in the district where it is situated. Echuca has a historical building, and that is the Bridge Hotel. In age, it is almost a venerable structure, for it dates back to the time when Echuca first began to blossom. Though much older than the other hotels in the district, the Bridge is still and will continue to be a fine, substantial brick structure. By building the Border Inn, the late Henry Hopwood laid the foundation of Echuca, and from that it's steadily grown. but the name of the hostelry some years ago was changed to the Bridge. By that it has been known by the travelling public. The Bridge Hotel for some time past has been under the proprietorship of Mr. B.R. Wilson, a gentleman well suited in many ways to supply the wants of the travelling public. The Bridge Hotel is situated as it is near the wharf and is one of the most popular amongst tourists. It is capitally located within a stone's throw of the Campaspe and Murray rivers. It is well appointed in every particular. It contains 40 rooms with dining rooms, parlours, private rooms, a music room and baths. Mr. B.R. Wilson won great favour in Melbourne when connected with the Sorrento Hotel, Queen Street, and his popularity here is just as sincere and marked. For 12 or 14 years, Mr. Wilson has been connected with the river trade, and he did exceedingly well on the Murray, Darling and Murrumbidgee rivers. He owns a smart little steamer, the Lancashire Lass, of 265 tonne, which is engaged on the Murray and is highly suitable for the carriage of wool and other products. By its means, Mr. Wilson transacts a thriving trade, and the Lancashire Lass, being fitted up for the conveyance of passengers, runs on pleasure trips and is a favourite among holiday excursionists. By this means, Mr. Wilson has increased the number of his friends, and his popularity is not confined to this district, but extends right down the Murray. And on the 9th of September 1916, it says, the provision of additional facilities at the Koondrook Wharf on the Murray River, including a steam crane, has been the means of considerably increasing the traffic. On the 26th of August, the steamer Glimpse arrived from Waruma East Station on the Murrumbidgee with 170 bales of wool and 37 bales of sheepskins, with which 41 bags of barley was shipped at Swan Hill, loaded on railway trucks in 4 hours. The wool was received in Melbourne within a week, having been carried 300 miles by river and 193 miles by rail. On the 10th of November 1919, the death of Bevan Robert Wilson is recorded in the Riverine Herald. At about 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the death occurred of Mr. Bevan Robert Wilson at the age of 68 years. Born in Ballarat, he came to Echuca with his parents, who conducted the Bridge Hotel for many years. He was educated in Geelong and was on the staff of the Ballarat Courier. He's known in journalistic circles as a contributor to the Argus, the Bulletin and the Riverina Herald. Later, Clarence and Bevan purchased the steamer Lancashire Lass and engaged in river trading for several years. On the death of his father, which occurred at Hay, New South Wales, Bevan, who had married Miss McPhail, became licensee of the Bridge Hotel. Some years afterwards, however, he let the premises and engaged in produce dealing, eventually taking up land at Echuca North, which he held until his demise. The late Mr. Wilson had been a member of the Echuca Borough Council for 20 years. On 2 occasions he held the office of Mayor for the year of 1903 and then from 1908 to 1909, whilst for 12 years he was an honorary justice. In public affairs, the deceased took a keen interest and was also an active participant in sport, particularly in cricket and rifle shooting. As an entertainer, Mr. Wilson was highly popular and made many public appearances. He was a member of the Masonic Order. For about 6 months the deceased gentleman had been ailing and lately been confined to his room. Death was due to cerebral hemorrhage. His wife predeceased him 15 months ago, and he leaves a family of 4 daughters and 3 sons, the last named only being 7 years of age. The second son, Clarence James Wilson, was born on the 27th of January 1863 in Geelong. So on the 27th of July 1887 it was recorded at the port of Echuca that the Glimpse departed with Clarence Wilson as the master, with barge for Tocumwal and upriver ports. A few days later, the chairman read a report received from Clarence J. Wilson, master of the steamer Glimpse, respecting the accident that happened to her consort, the barge Impulse, a fortnight ago through colliding with the cylinder of the Murray Bridge on the Victorian side of the river. And a month later, in September 1887, the port of Echuca, the Glimpse steamer arriving with C. Wilson as the master with a barge from Tocumwal carrying a cargo of timber sleepers and sundries. And a month after that, it was recorded that the steamer Glimpse with C. Wilson master arrived from Tocumwal with wool, wheat and timber. 2 weeks later, departing Echuca, the Glimpse with C. Wilson as the master, heading for Albury with salt and sundries. On the 10th of November, the Glimpse steamer arrived with a barge from Tocumwal to Echuca with a full cargo of wool and sawn timber. And a week later, the projected departures was the Glimpse with C. Wilson as master with a barge for Tocumwal with cargo and machinery. And on the 2nd of December 1887, the Glimpse with C. Wilson as the master, taking his barge to the Little Murray. 2 weeks after, it arrived at Echuca with Clary as the master from Loddon River with salt and chaff. And a week after that, it departed and went to Barmah with general cargo. And by the 28th of January 1888, the Glimpse with Clary again as master was heading for Goulburn in ballast. On the 13th of February 1888, he had returned to Echuca with a barge from Goulburn with wheat and sundries. A week after that, the steamer arrived from Barmah with a full cargo of wheat. A month later, he arrived at Echuca with a barge from Tocumwal with red gum and sundries. And then 2 months after that, he returned from Barmah with a barge with timber. A week after, he was heading off for the Murrumbidgee with general cargo. And on the 17th of January 1889, it mentioned the Lancashire Lass. So around 7 months later, it was recorded that Clary Wilson was now master of the Lancashire Lass, and it had travelled from Koondrook and Swan Hill with wheat and sundries. On the 9th of May 1889, it mentions the Licensing Act notice, and it says, I, Jane Sarah Wilson of Echuca, being the holder of victualler's licence for the house known as the Bridge Hotel, situated at the Esplanade Echuca, hereby give notice it's my intention to apply in the licensing court to transfer the rights and privileges of the licence to Clarence James Wilson for the residue of the term between the 21st of May 1889 and the 31st of December 1889. In September 1889, it's mentioned that he's the master of the Lancashire Lass with a barge heading for the Murrumbidgee. And on the 6th of June 1890, it is mentioned that the Lancashire Lass with C. Wilson as the captain is departing Echuca for Swan Hill with general cargo and timber. 2 weeks later, he's arrived back in the port of Echuca from the Goulburn with cargo of wheat. 3 weeks later, he's again arrived at Echuca with a barge from the Lower Murray with wheat. And in September 1890, again on the Lancashire Lass, he's come from Barmah to Echuca with a full load of barley. 2 months after that, he's arrived back in Echuca again from Swan Hill with 1,400 bales of wool. And 3 months after that, also arrived in Echuca from the Goulburn with 217 bags of wheat and 15 bags of barley. Again, 2 months after that, he departs Echuca on the Lancashire Lass for Kahuna with bricks on board. October 1891, shipping notes, the Lancashire Lass with Captain C. Wilson arrived last night from the Murrumbidgee with 1,457 bales of wool. And then it's not until about 8 months later that it mentions that the Lancashire Lass is departing from Echuca with Captain Wilson and will commence loading for Mildura and Wentworth today. Besides a large consignment of flour, she takes a large quantity of timber for the new bridge. A month after that, Port of Echuca arrivals. The Lancashire Lass was expected to arrive last night from Wilcannia. And it mentions on the 4th of July that the Lancashire Lass with Captain Wilson had been at Mildura with a load of chaff, and it also called into Koondrook and loaded salt. So by the 1890s, river trade to Albury had all but ceased. But in July 1893, the Lancashire Lass with a barge in tow was the first cargo steamer for almost 10 years to reach Albury. The river was badly silted, and at Howlong, to get under the bridge, her wheelhouse, funnel and deck houses had to be dismantled, and cargo from the barge added to settle the steamer deeper in the water. The Lancashire Lass arrived in Echuca on the 24th of October 1893 from the Murrumbidgee, loaded with wool. And then 3 months later, it's recorded that she was departing Echuca for Swan Hill. 2 months later, on the 26th of March 1894, there was an excerpt from the newspaper saying, stolen from Lancashire Lass, a young cattle dog's reward on recovery or reward for information leading to recovery. Clarence J. Wilson. There's nothing for about 8 months, and then it mentions how the Lancashire Lass was departing with Captain Wilson for Swan Hill. It will return in a week with wheat, taken on 2 barges, and all the wheat was coming from the Mallee. 2 weeks later, he arrives from Swan Hill with 2,300 bags of wheat. On the 30th of March 1895, he departs on the Lancashire Lass for Swan Hill. And then in 1900, Clarence went to the Boer War. So it says, Sergeant Clary Wilson, writing to his brother, Councillor B.R. Wilson from Norval's Pont on the 8th of April, 1900. We have had a busy time here of late and sleep under arms night and day. Every precaution is taken to prevent a surprise, and the other night I thought we were fairly in it. I was in the trenches about a mile out and had charge of 20-odd men. We wore fixed bayonets and were all ready. 100 rounds per man, with, of course, a reserve supply. The searchlight was working overhead, and 4 large guns, ready to demoralise any or everything. Anyhow, the enemy never came to close quarters. As we get up on the tablelands, smoking, talking and so on is of course forbidden, and consequently there is nothing to help while away the time, only a fixed stare and careful scrutiny of all of your surroundings. The Boers are very cunning and able to set traps. The news came in the other day, just out of Bloemfontein, that they had got 7 of our guns and killed and wounded 300 men and captured 200 wagons. It was a surprise later we got some of the wagons back. It is said that Godwood, who had led the Lancers at Omdurman, saved the position, or the loss to us would have been terrible. Another report is just in of 5 companies of the Royal Irish being captured between here and Bloemfontein. Later it is said that they are hemmed in and the Hussar Regiment is going to their rescue. All these things, of course, make us doubly watchful. We are camped on either side of the river and have, with the assistance of the Royal Irish, Argyll and Sutherlands, Royal Engineers and other regiments, including Gordon's and Blackwatch, constructed a temporary bridge through the bed of the Orange River. This was badly wanted as Robert's army was nearly starving. Some of them had nothing to eat for 4 days and the remainder were on half and even quarter rations. Now, however, as the trains can get through to Bloemfontein, 120 miles from here, things are okay again. We have had plenty of rations lately. Some 3 weeks ago, 2 sniping Boers shot one of our sentries, but our revenge wasn't long in coming, as a patrol got them and they were shot and buried before they were cold. There is a good deal of sickness in our camp and around us, but I am all right and have never had an hour's sickness throughout the campaign. Kitchener and an army have just arrived on the other side, from where I don't know. We have a very powerful searchlight. It lights up the Kopje into all the semblance of a beautiful silver cloud. And Clary died on the 24th of March 1905 in Madagascar. He was a prospector there, and his obituary was placed in the Australian papers, and it says at Echuca, the 13th of May 1905. Obituary. Feelings of profound regret will seize upon Echuca people as they learn of the death of Captain Clarence Wilson, brother of our esteemed townsman, Mr. B.R. Wilson, and only a few years ago was a popular identity of our town. The sad ending of a most promising life occurred at Madagascar on the 24th of March, and the news of the sorrowful event was sent by a missionary of the island to Mr. A.J. Mitchell of Echuca, who conveyed the vague intimation to the deceased's unsuspecting brother. It will be remembered that the late Captain Wilson served most conspicuously and with singular honours in the Boer War, and though at the close of the campaign he returned to Echuca, he again journeyed to South Africa, and his presence at Madagascar would be only an evidence of his well-known enterprising disposition. No details are supplied of the captain's death. Further information wasn't written until the 16th of October 1905, and it said the late Captain C. Wilson. In Saturday's Age, the following paragraph appeared. Official iniquities have been made of the federal authorities by the French administration in Madagascar with a view to the discovery of Australian relatives of a man named Clarence Wilson. This person, who is alleged to be an Australian, died at Andinovate, possessed of considerable property. In the usual course, this property has been placed in the hands of the French curator of interstate estates, with whom relatives of the deceased should communicate. There is little doubt but that the person referred to is the late Captain Clarence Wilson, brother of our esteemed townsman, Mr. B.R. Wilson. His brother has since made inquiries, but no particulars have come forward. The third child was Ellen Jane Wilson. She was known as Jessie, and she was born in 1867 in Buninyong. She married David Nucci at the residence of her brother, Bervin, and they had 6 children, 5 surviving infancy. David was also from a paddle steamer family, and he'd been born in South Australia in 1864. Ellen died in 1906, aged only 39. And the notice of her death states, "A sad death occurred in Echuca yesterday when Mrs. Nucci, wife of Captain D. Nucci and sister of B.R. Wilson, died suddenly at her residence, High Street South. The deceased lady was taken ill yesterday morning and rapidly sank, expiring early in the afternoon. She leaves 4 young children, and profound regret is felt for the husband and brother throughout the district." David went on to marry Dinah Flora Glazier in 1910, and Dinah's husband previously had died in 1903, and they had 3 boys together. And Captain David Nucci's obituary. The remains of the late Captain David Nucci were laid to rest in Echuca Cemetery yesterday. He was one of the pioneer skippers on the Murray River and its tributaries. He was born 73 years ago at Myland, South Australia, and from his boyhood was associated with the river. His 3 brothers were all river skippers, and his father a boat owner at Myland. Captain Nucci gained his master's certificate 55 years ago and was master of many steamers which traded on the Murray and its tributaries. He was employed by Stratton's Limited and later by Pumuan Wright and Company and the Murray Shipping Company until trade virtually ceased some years ago. In 1891 he was made master of a ship carrying white wool, which was allowed through the boom placed across the river by the striking shearers to stop scab wool from going downstream. Earlier he was master of a hawking boat which sold supplies to upstream stations. His last job was master of SS Melbourne when he came out of retirement to do snagging work at Turrumbary Lock, following a big flood. Prior to his retirement, his last 2 boats were the Pevensey and the Yulunga. Captain Nucci died while on holiday in Melbourne. He lived by himself in Echuca ever since his wife's death last year. He decided to never leave the river on which he had spent the most active years of his life. He's survived by 3 sons, Euston, a grazier in the Mornington Peninsula, Burvin, an inspector of the telephone branch at the GPO in Melbourne, and Clarence, who was unable to attend the funeral as he was in a serious state in Melbourne Hospital following an accident in which he was hit by a motorcycle. The late Captain Nucci was universally liked and widely known. It is believed that there is no other man who has better knowledge of the Murray and its tributaries, or more friends amongst the old identities of the heyday of the river, when Echuca was the second port in the state. So an interesting story of the Wilson brothers. Family did very well for themselves, particularly with their ownership of the Bridge Hotel. It was obviously one of the busiest and most successful pubs at the time, and the Bridge Hotel still exists today.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.